What's up, everybody? I'm back. I haven't played a game of Commander or posted anything at all in the past 7 weeks. I've been in the lab. This is going to be a meta-analysis of the March of Machines cards and how I feel about them in EDH. We'll take a look at what other card evaluators I respect have said about the cards. I'll tell you where I agree and disagree, what I'm adding, and I'll also mention what I'm cutting, which I think is easy information to provide. It's very informative, and I wish other creators would talk about this more. I mentioned I've been in the lab. I built 4 new decks for myself in paper, 2 Commander and 2 Oathbreaker. I also started selling decks on eBay. I got my first 6 sales under my belt, and I bought all the cards for another 18 decks, including some awesome new Lord of the Rings decks that I'm pumped about. There's a Sauron and Gandalf. But another one of the things I've been doing in the lab is upgrading all of my decks with the March of Machines cards. That's what I'm here to talk about, so let's get it. 17 of my 22 decks are getting new tech. I'm adding a total of 51 cards to my decks, which is by far the most impact the set has had on my decks. It's actually more than triple the amount of cards I usually add from a set. So this is the most powerful EDH set that's ever been printed. I say that not objectively, but in terms of the actual impact it's having on my personal deck set. The set is introducing battles, a new card type. I think they're very fun and interesting, but I also think they're very powerful. And I watch a lot of card evaluation content, and I've seen a lot of smart creators misevaluating battles to some degree or another. I think they'll prove to be very powerful for a few reasons, with one of the main reasons being they'll generally be very easy to flip. If someone is trying to flip a battle, most opponents will look at the backside and evaluate how scary is it going to be if they flip this. Most of the backsides of these battles are not very threatening. They're value pieces. I think smart Commander players are not going to give up parts of their board to stop someone from getting value unless that person is the archenemy. So if you're the archenemy against skilled players, even your mundane battles should be difficult to flip in theory, but you don't really care, you're doing fine. And if someone else is the archenemy, the other players in the game will be even more likely to let you flip your battles to help combat the problem player. What an amazing mechanic. It's so cool. It's a little political. I think it's going to work really nice. Furthermore, I think that only a small percentage of decks are in a position to be able to throw away resources defending battles. Looking at my personal decks, I think 4 of my 22 decks would be in a great position to defend battles. And on the other side, I think that 16 of my 22 decks either have enough attack power or enough evasion to flip battles without many problems. These are going to be great in my play groups. I already know which players in my group are incredibly unlikely to waste their resources defending these battles. Many of these players don't even defend their own health totals, and I'm one of them. A lot of times, I don't have creatures to just throw away. I'll gladly take 5 to the face rather than lose anything, and I'm even less likely to block for a battle. Even in some go-wide token decks like my Ren and Siri where I'm making a bunch of 1/1s, I can't just casually throw them away. I need a critical mass for the deck to work. So these will be great in your play group because you will know who to play them on. And if you're playing with new people or randoms on spell table, these will be awesome too, because I think attacking a battle is a great way to proc attack triggers without drawing aggro from someone. You don't know how spiteful these people are. So many games on my channel, I've seen players react to attacks in unpredictable ways or retaliate from attacks in a way that's over the top. I've seen people swoop in and kill someone and be like, yeah, that's for what you did to me on turn 6. I'm not a spite player myself, but that was even me once. You remember turn 4, right? I remember it like it was
yesterday. I didn't.
I think in general, being able to attack a battle and not a player is a useful option to have. So useful, in fact, that I can see many situations where I'd attack someone else's battle to help them flip it. Maybe I'm trying to help them combat the archenemy. Maybe I have an attack trigger and attacking someone else's battle is the best way to proc it. There's a lot of times when I attack someone that I don't actually want to deal damage to them, but I need to hit from the attack trigger. And I think having the option to attack a battle is very strategically relevant. So that's my thought on battles as a whole, but that's not what makes them so powerful. The best battles generally provide you with immediate value, commensurate with what you're paying. And the backside is strictly upside. These are the ones that actually made the cuts with my deck, although there are a couple exceptions, and I wish I could add a lot more battles. Let's start by looking at Invasion of Allura.
Permanent then. So the problem is, Richard was saying players can stop you from flipping the battle. This is the one where players will use their removal to stop you from dealing 7, which is already hard enough.
Yeah.
I like the idea of glimpse, but 4 is kind of rough, like a rough cutoff to build your deck.
It's
around.
also worth mentioning you have to cast the backside, so it's also possible they're just like, sure, spend all your time flipping it, and then they like counterspell or swan song it or something. So okay, maybe it's not a B. I just really love this card. I really love this card, but I am having a hard time to figure a specific deck that I would put it in. But it's one of my favorite battles. But I'll give it a C.
It will be glorious. Right?
Oh,
it will be sweet.
when you pull it off, but it's very difficult.
So the guys were not very high on this card. I think this is a great first battle to examine because it has one of the most threatening backsides, and it gets to the heart of the issue of how much your opponents will do to try to stop a flip. I'm going to go on record right now. I think this card is being slept on. I've actually seen it misevaluated all over. I would give this card an A. I bet this card is not going into nearly as many decks as it should, and my theory as to why it's being slept on is because the benefits are all over the place. So let me break down how I see it. The front side, you essentially draw 2 non-lands, 4 CMC or less, then you cast one of them for free. Splashing a random value piece into play is fun and cool, but I understand some of you are savages who care only for value, and I have a foot in both camps myself. So the value of the front is, as I see it, 5 CMC. Draw 2, that's a Sign in Blood, except slightly better because we don't lose life and they're guaranteed to be non-lands. Which by the time we have a Wooburg will be advantageous that they're non-lands, not always, but generally. And we play one of them for free. This card will be either CMC 1, 2, 3, or 4. On average, we'll cast something with a mana value 2.5. No, maybe higher because most decks contain less 1-drops, but we'll say 2.5 give us an approximate mana value of 5 on the front side, which is what we paid. So this is fine and playable, but not strong, which is oddly enough the same thing I'd say for Sign in Blood. So the front side on its own isn't doing enough to justify inclusion outside of 5-color budget builds, where I want to say in 5C budget, I think this is an auto-include for me. This works even if you can't flip it, because so many of the good Wooburg cards are not budget friendly, and this is just a fun and cool card that you can't miss. You're guaranteed 2 cards, 1 into play, and if you're in Wooburg, it's almost like it's has a high chance of being on theme just because you're in 5-color. But you do really want to flip this battle to see its power. And if you can flip it, which I think a lot of decks can, it's just absurd. And I guess some people aren't seeing it because the effects are all over the place. So let me break down how I see it. You get to draw 2 cards, destroy a permanent, and copy a permanent. Completely ignore these last 2 effects unless of course they're relevant to your deck archetype. Play an artifact for free and put 3 counters. You spent 5 mana, you get 5 mana value on the front side, and if you're able to flip it, I'd say you're getting 13 CMC mana value at least. As a deck builder, 5 mana, draw 4, play 1 for free, destroy something, copy something. That's where I want to be. It's versatile and there's so much other value there. And I do want to address the good point the Commander Clash guys brought up. This backside is actually strong enough that people will go out of their way to stop you from flipping it, which is true. But I question to what degree they'll try to stop you. I think if you play this card and you try to flip it, skilled opponents will look at the backside of this card and rightfully evaluate it like this. Okay, so they get to draw 2 cards, copy something, blow something up. Who cares about the rest? I'm only going to try to stop you from flipping this if I look at your board and see something that if you copied it, it would be insane. And then I would check if there's a piece that I think you would blow up, which is absolutely crucial to my game plan, which with my decks, this is very rarely the case. People blow up my stuff all the time. I think it's crucial that commander decks are built to fight through and protect against spot removal and wraths. So while Invasion of Alara contains one of the most threatening backsides, I don't think I'd be likely to spend my own resources to stop you from flipping this unless you were the archenemy. Even though the opponent is getting a whole bunch of different effects, the individual effects are low impact, and smart players know to be very selective when choosing when to spend resources to slow down a specific opponent. If your opponent flips this, they get tons of value, but I'm a firm believer that you don't need to respond to value. You really should only be responding to things that directly or crucially affect the game state or the ability of your deck to perform. I think that all the effects this card gives are just nebulous enough for it to slide under the radar on most board states. And even if you never flip it, the front side alone is not a disaster, and it's fun. It's like a souped up chaotic Sign in Blood. It seems expensive, but it's only 5 mana. That's not an expensive spell. I think Wooburg always makes things look more expensive, but with mana bases these days, I mean, I run a lot of 5-color decks. I have 5 in paper, and paying Wooburg is not hard in a 5-color deck. That's generally what you're set up to do. I am putting this card in 2 decks. It's powerful enough to go in all 5 of my 5-color decks easily. The decks not getting Invasion of Alara are only because they care more about theme than power. One's a dice roll deck, a silver border deck, and one's a group hug deck. Here are the decks it's going in. All the deck lists I mentioned will be in the description for interested parties. The first deck getting Invasion of Alara is Tiamat Treasure's Dragon Tribal, who can flip it herself, and if they remove her to stop me, I love it. I'll get her cast trigger again. It's the only card from this set the deck is getting. The cut was Nature's Lore, but I'm trying to figure out how to get it back in. I strongly did consider Invasion of Tarkir for this.
That's enough to kill things. It can also hit face, can also flip a battle if you want to. And then the backside's legitimately scary in a dragon deck. If you have 3 or 4 dragons, each of them shocking every attack, plus dragons have some extra combat step dragons, it seems like you just win the game in a turn or two if you flip it. So outside of dragons, horrible, but in dragons, like auto include, right? Is there any reason you wouldn't play this in Dragon Tribal, like Dragon or whatever, Miram?
Because dragons are really good.
Dragons are expensive,
you're like,
though.
Oh, all of these are game-ending threats, and that's what makes the dragon deck really good.
Richard is exactly right here. I did strongly consider this card, but it's not good enough. With Tiamat, I could cast the front side for 2 mana, deal 7 damage to a creature, but 2 mana, deal 7 damage wouldn't be a playable card. This is tenuous damage removal, and I rarely run creature removal. In general, my spot removal should hit more than 1 card type. As for the backside, it's strong, but I don't like being encouraged to swing out like this. Choosing how and when to attack is complicated and crucial business. And in general, dragons don't really go wide. I wouldn't say this is a dragon staple at all. It's really for decks with restricted color identities or budget concerns. But red being the color of dragons. Oh, never mind budget concerns, it's expensive. Invasion of Alara is also going in Ramos Dragon Engine, where it's absurd, because when you flip it, technically you're casting it again, so it'll proc Ramos again. It's a Wooburg tribal deck, so it's a great flavor fit as well. Ramos is also getting the new Omnath. It's a really cool card. It's ramp and draw, the ability to save mana. What a cool card. The cuts were Smuggler's Share and Gate Colossus. It's a gate deck, so I love this card, but colorless vanilla finally gets edged out. Omnath is also going in my Group Hug Kenny deck, which is looking to save up a lot of mana to win with Crackle of Power or Iganjo Uprising or Invasion of New Phyrexia.
All other deck, it falls very quickly to don't play this, I think.
But isn't that fine, though? Like, if you never flip to Teferi? I think that's part of what makes...
Like, you don't want sorcery speed make a giant board that everyone's scared of. You really need it to be... White Sun Zenith is so much better because you can just end of turn make tokens and then do something. This is like Wrath check for the table, right? Like, anyone have a Wrath here? Because you're getting Wrath as soon as you cast this.
I think this card is really good. It can create an army, and it has an upside of being able to draw cards or remove something. What else could you possibly want? White Sun Zenith does not hold a candle to this, in my opinion. I will grant this, the fact that White Sun Zenith is an instant is huge. Make tokens on the end step. That's a big advantage. But these tokens have vigilance, and that's huge in my opinion. There's plenty of times where I could kill a player, or a player could be killed, but someone might die from the crackback. Plus, it can draw you cards, pump the knights, or more importantly, remove a non-land permanent. I really, really value versatility, and this card is dynamic. Richard did bring up a great point. This is a Wrath check for the table, because you're getting Wrath as soon as you cast this. To that, I say, yes, good, a Wrath check. When I ramp hard and play this, regardless of what other creatures I have, it's going to be, okay, wipe the board now or I win. In this Kenrith deck, at least. It's a Wrath check, and I like that because I doubt my opponent's hand preparedness. With White Sun Zenith, you could play the tokens on the end step. Now look, they can't Wrath you, and I can attack with all this stuff. But they can Wrath you as soon as you pass the turn, and none of your stuff has vigilance. So in that specific situation where you have enough resources to win the game on the spot, White Sun Zenith is a better raw finisher, but in every other situation, I'd take the 2/2s with vigilance. And if they Wrath you, you're still left with the battle, and the upside of being able to draw cards or pump the team or remove something. I just value that versatility so much, and I think this is the best army in a can card ever printed because it's a finisher that can do other things. And this is a point that transcends this card that I want to make. Maybe you're like Richard here and you want your finisher to be as good as it possibly can at finishing. And you don't want a card that does some extra things but it's actually worse at his job, at being a finisher. That's a valid perspective, but I'll choose versatility over efficiency any day. I take a hyper-geometric approach to deck building, so cards that fill multiple roles are what I look for. What other Make X creature cards can provide this much versatility? The direct cut for this deck was Defenders of Humanity, a card I also think is better than White Sun Zenith. Kenro also got this cool Halo foil printing, and another card there's some buzz about.
I think, since it can draw basically like it could draw basically one card per opponent. It could draw like up to 3 cards per turn cycle, but if it's drawing a single card per turn cycle consistently, like 80% of the time or higher, this card is like straight gas.
This card's busted though, right? This is
it's
white
so good
Esper
against me.
Sentinel.
I mean, we've seen the Council of Four be brutal.
Wait, do you guys really think it's that good?
CDH
You would take this
playable,
over
like-
Esper Sentinel?
Yes.
And number 1, the top card in the set, it's just a real person because it's Yuta Takahashi, but actually it's Fairy Mastermind.
Now, I think this is the best card in the set by a mile. And that's saying something, but it's so much better than everyone. It's like this card could potentially be an A+, because the simple fact of the matter is, this is a super staple of this format. This is silly.
It's kind of like Consecrated Sphinx. It's like a mini version.
I think this card is just fine. Look, when Smuggler Share came out, I was pumped. I put it in every deck, even 5 color. I was like, it ramps me and draws me cards in the 3 mana slot, hypergeometry, efficiency, wow. Over time, I learned the same lesson that hype surrounding cards like Mangara the Diplomat and Monologue Tax provided. Depending on your opponents to do something is just not that strong. Smuggler Share is a good card that I still love and still has a great home in a few of my decks. But to me, Fairy Mastermind is a worse version of Smuggler Share, basically just because it's on a creature and it's going to die. Also, the ability is overcosted. Side note. It's a good card, I just disagree with so many people calling it a new staple. Certainly great for CEDH. But here, with its new home in Group Hug Kenny, part of my game plan involves making my opponents draw tons of cards, so the procs will be forced and the overcosted bottom mode actually becomes relevant. I found one more spot for it. Eureka, Ninja Tribal. A cheap evasive creature with flash is perfect for this deck. And there's a ridiculous amount of card draw in the deck already, but that's what I love about this fit. This deck does not need the card draw at all, which makes Fairy Mastermind good. If I only have one piece of draw and it's attached to a creature, I wouldn't be happy. Morbid Opportunist is awesome. It'll draw you a bunch of cards, but I struggle to find homes for it because it's just a creature and it's going to die. Another card that's going in Yuriko is Invasion of Kamigawa. This card is so underwhelming that I completely passed it over when looking through the set, and I was suddenly made aware of it only when a buddy opened one in a pack. It's a bad card, but only 43 ninjas have ever been printed, and only 37 of them are available in Dimir. It's slightly less worthless than what it's replacing, Nezumi Prowler. I'm not complaining. I like playing bad ninjas. That's the kind of magic with my ninja tribal or my frog tribal. You take this undersupported tribe with bad creatures and the commander makes them amazing. I'm excited to add this card to my deck and to be able to, know it was a bad card, but know it's the best choice for this slot. That's what Commander is all about, making bad cards good again. The last card Yuriko is getting is Invasion of Fiora.
Yeah, this card is fine. It's middle of the road. It's like a bad board wipe. It's not. It's so.
But there's upside on the backside.
Yeah, but there's upside on the backside, which is whatever. C-, bad board wipe, okay card in the back.
Isn't this just good? Like, is this not a good Magic card?
If you build
I'm
around
tempted to
it.
bring it down to a C.
So,
You can blink it with Aminatu.
but that's all built around. Like, I think the problem is that every mode of this has cheaper options. Sure, if you build around legendaries or around Marchesa doing anything, like most decks don't run planeswalkers or battles to use this with. Like all parts of this card are built around.
It's really good in a legendary deck because you can attempt to wipe the non-legendaries out, but like if you're just trying to do this for value, chances are people have legendaries and non-legendary creatures, so it's hard to get an asymmetrical Wrath going. 6 mana for Wrath is not good. The backside just gets you killed. So in 1v1, I think it's reasonable for you to draw a card every turn with this. This ensures that people will start trying to like nickel and dime you for damage so that you don't draw the card.
Really good in a legendary deck, you say? I couldn't disagree more. I'm highlighting mostly clips that I disagree with, not to prove someone wrong or anything, but because I think the disagreements are inherently more insightful, and new card evaluation is notoriously tricky. I'm not saying I'm right, just I disagree and kind of presenting you both sides. I really think this card is phenomenal. Here's how I would rank the black board wipes. Number 1, Decree of Pain. Number 2, Meathook Massacre. Number 3, Invasion of Fiora. Number 4, Toxic Deluge. Number 5, Damnation. Number 6, Blood Money. The front side is a very unique card and absolutely worth the 6 mana by itself. I don't know how Richard got into the mindset of, well, that's playable on Legendary Tribal. No, this is what you want from a board wipe. Being able to choose Legendary or non-Legendary is so strong. All commanders are legendary, and legendary creatures continue to be printed at a historic rate. There's many situations where it'll be beneficial for you to wipe the board of legendary creatures, or to wipe the board of only non-legendaries. The board could be getting out of control, but you really need to keep your commander, or maybe you've just drawn a few of your strong legendary creatures, and wiping non-legendaries would leave you with a far stronger board than your opponent's. I love the idea of this card being able to sit in my hand, and I can shape the board and which creatures I deploy, knowing a somewhat non-symmetrical board wipe is coming. Or I could always just choose both and wipe everything. So the front side is a highly playable card on its own. I view the backside as all bonus. It can draw cards, yay hypergeometry. It can block well, menace for attack triggers, remove the counters. I disagree with Richard's notion that this will get you killed. Putting myself in the shoes of my opponent, if I was playing against this card, I would really only attempt to damage the player if it was extremely convenient to me. I'm not going out of my way to stop a single card draw. It's like a Phyrexian Arena. However, he's not wrong per se. Undoubtedly, a certain percentage of your opponents will have a different mindset than me, or even inexplicably go out of their way to stop you from getting value. But that happens no matter what. I see people blowing up non-threatening value pieces all the time. But your highly skilled opponents won't do this. And I've always had the philosophy to craft my decks under the assumption that you're going to be going against highly skilled opponents every game. Don't cater towards what you think unskilled or even average players might do against you, which could lead you not only to playing less perfect cards, but it's a big point when it comes to card evaluation. In my opinion, Richard here is one of the best card evaluators alive, and he says the backside will get you killed. Will everyone attack you to stop you from drawing this card? Maybe? But generally, is it smarter for them to change their plans to stop you from drawing a single card per turn cycle? No. Someone will do it irrationally, but trying to pick cards or evaluate cards based on what irrational actions certain players might take gets you out of pocket of trying to pick the right cards for your deck. In Yuriko, this card is especially good because I can ninjutsu Marchesa back to my hand and replay the board wipe. It replaces Damnation, a card that I love and value for its efficiency, but utility is king. Yuriko is also getting Schema Thief.
A token that is a copy of target artifact that player controls, way too reliant on what our opponents have. I don't want to have to rely on my opponents to get good things. Maybe play this in like a Brutaclad deck where it's kind of interesting, where you can steal their best thing. And it's like, whoo, I'm going to make their best thing a token. And it's fine. Yep.
I couldn't find hardly anyone even mentioning this card, let alone being pumped about it. To me, this is a next level ramp card. If you look through my lists, you'll see Sculpting Steel listed under ramp in a lot of my decks. Same with Phyrexian Metamorph. I love these cards as mana rocks, and I don't feel bad using them early game to copy a Soul Ring or a Signet, and I feel amazing when I draw them end game to make a copy of some other powerful artifact on the field. I also love Thieving Skydiver and Dak Faden as mana rocks, and I think this card is just better. It's 4 mana. Let's get that out of the way. I loathe that it's 4 mana. But if it was 3, I would auto-include it in every single one of my decks. I really don't mind spending 4 mana on ramp with a Thran Dynamo or a Sky Shroud claim, so I can't help but compare this card to those classes as well. The difference is those cards provide you more up front, which is going to be more reliable. But this card provides what I love, exceptional velocity. If a Schema Thief comes down early, I see a play pattern of a rock on turn 2 or this on 3. Then for the next 4 or 5 turns, until this is answered or the board is wiped, you'll create a copy of a Soul Ring or a Signet every single turn. Early game, this is a threat that'll have to be answered. The floor is pretty low as you pay 4 mana and you get nothing right away. But even if it lives for 1 turn and I could swing and get a copy of a Signet and it dies, that's not a disaster. The Signet stays. I think the upside is big. I'll tell you in my experience from playing Sculpting Steel that mid to end game, juicy targets are more plentiful than you might realize. Great Henge, Alhamaret's Archive, Portal to Phyrexia, there's Meteor Golem, Bolas the Citadel, so many nice things you can copy. This card has a low floor, a high upside. It's versatile. This has me written all over it. Full disclosure, my favorite deck is Xanathar, and I love playing my opponent's stuff against them, so my objectivity may be a bit skewed here, but this is my favorite card in the set, and I think it provides one of the highest upsides of any ramp option ever printed. My Sig Surprise deck is all about artifacts and hard-casting Eldrazi. It is also getting Schema Thief. It's replacing Everflowing Chalice. Hopefully, this makes me big mana to cast those big nasties. Also, there's a bunch of swords in the deck. Sig hold sword and proc himself. But this flying body could hold a sword there too. I like the fit. Speaking of decks with swords, Zhao Dun, the One-Eyed. My beloved Suicide Black deck. It's getting Invasion of Fiora, which replaces Damnation, but it's also getting Bitterthorn, Nisa's Animist. A cool card that I can't decide whether or not is better than Sword of the Animist. It doesn't matter. It's a redundancy. These cards are awesome and highly underplayed. They should be in almost every single non-green list, unless you almost never run basic lands, which is why I never play these cards. But they do have a lovely home here. The cut was Planar Atlas. Also getting cut from this deck is Phyrexian Obliterator. You know it's good when the cut hurts. But it's getting replaced by Sheoldred. Just Sheoldred. When I first saw this card, I was like, wow, a much worse version of Rise of the Dark Realms. Not interested. But this card does a lot, and Rise of the Dark Realms is one of those things where even a bad version of it is still good. And while I only run Rise in my mill deck where I can really fill that graveyard to make it game ending, this card fills the graveyard on its own by killing 6 creatures and putting a total of 18 other cards in the graveyard. I'm looking forward to slapping this down. It'll probably get removed, but so do most threats. Some don't. The last ad for this deck is absolutely insane. People are sleeping on this. Infernal Sovereign. If you have a big, threatening, evasive body, and you also draw me cards or remove something, I am in. Card draw is my favorite of the 2, and black is my favorite of the 5. So this card is my jam. When I deploy this, I'll be asking for permission, not forgiveness. If anything, it's too good at its job and it will kill you, like John Wick. I started as a mono black player way back in the before times, so I'll feel right at home being in the position to weigh my health total against my cards in hand. To me, this is a powerhouse staple. New powerhouse staples usually make me sad, but with Infernal Sovereign, I'll be laughing my way all the way to the bank. The cut is Phyrexian Arena. Bye, old boy. I'll miss you. Another deck getting the Infernal Sovereign is Kodama and Ikra Shadiki. The cut is Harvester of Souls, so you know it's good. For this next card, basically, I saw this card from the new set. I was very unimpressed by it, but after 2 days thinking about it, I ended up putting it into my Kodama deck, one of my strongest decks, even cutting a card I never thought I would cut. This process was so strange that I'll give you the cut first. Incarnation Technique. This card is incredible in Kodama. I love it. I thought I'd never cut it. 5 mana, I demonstrate it, and I mill and recur 2 creatures. They both enter and proc Kodama. I drop 2 more in. For me, this card can build a whole board. Usually I'm recurring threats I have that had died, but with 41 creatures in the deck, I can play this card on an empty graveyard, and the chance that I'll hit 2 creatures in the mill is 96.9%. But it's getting cut for Vorinclex. A card I really thought was unimpressive at first read. I still doubt its power, but I do not doubt that it is perfect for this deck. The first flip here is Incarnation Technique, and I don't have to demonstrate and let an opponent do it. Despite the mana cost difference, this is a strict upgrade because this deck really wants to be playing creatures, not sorceries. Then I get these 2 forests to hand. Usually I don't really value lands to hand, it's not ramp, but they are more valued in this specific deck because of the setup. It has only 34 lands and it has 20 pieces of card draw, so it's really relying on establishing draw to hit land drops, and the risk of missing mid-game land drops is very real. And what a great body for 5 mana. There's the counters, there's the last fight mode on the back is awesome. It's in. Kodama is also getting Invasion of Zendikar. I think this card is a staple. One of the best ramp spells ever printed. In terms of cards that ramp you in lands, for 2 mana you get 1 land, although there's few redundancies there, it hardly counts as a class. For 3 mana, where Cultivate Kodama's Reach, you get 1 land to hand and 1 to field. For 4 mana, you get 2 to the field. So we get on-rate ramp, then it flips into this mana dork. When a battle flips, you actually cast the backside. And I counted in this deck, there are 34 cards that have synergies with me either casting a creature or having an extra creature on the battlefield. Compare that to Skyshroud Claim. 4 mana for 2 lands. They do come in untapped. Untapped is great. But this card is a permanent, which means it procs my commander. Actually twice, because when I cast it, it procs the backside again. This is now, to me, the best piece of ramp in one of my strongest decks. The thing with sorcery-based green land ramp, it's so strong, but they are all non-creatures, so in a lot of green decks, it's turning off a lot of synergies. They're still worth it, but this card is generally going to be better in my opinion. I compare it to Wood Elves, which is an outstanding card. There's so much upside here. My son pointed out that I've been seeing so many destroy all non-land permanents, board wipes in my games. This creature would dodge those. It's not a land. It's not important. It's just cool. The cut is Gilanra. Invasion of Zendikar and Vorinclex are so good that I had to do the dreaded and cut non-basics for basics, bringing our basic land count up to 4 in this deck. Fail to find is fine. Spicy. Kodama is also getting Yargul and Multani. This card's actually replacing a card it is objectively worse than, Archon of Cruelty. But I think it's a much more flavorful inclusion to this Gruul Stompy deck. And maybe I'll just get some of that power-based draw when I have this, and it'll be glorious. Not much else to say about this card. It's not very powerful, but it's so, so cool. Another card that's going into this deck is Tribute to the World Tree. This one is really powerful and a new staple. I've actually thought about this card a lot. My first thoughts were, it's power crept, it's too good, I hate it, it's bad for the game. I started thinking about where this card would fall on my ranking of all-time green card draw, and I've changed my thoughts about it. This is a really good card design. The 3 green pips. I just hate green, and I'm salty anytime they get a new piece, I'll be honest. This is the kind of incremental card draw green should get. And I'll say it's a beautifully crafted redundancy. In this deck, it replaces Beast Whisperer, and I rank it only behind Great Henge and Guardian Project for this type of effect. Another deck getting Tribute to the World Tree is Rin and Siri, again knocking out Beast Whisperer. And Rin and Siri is getting a flavor upgrade. I'm cutting Craterhoof and replacing it with City on Fire. Not as good, but a much cooler way to win. Cats and dogs will overrun you, burn down your city, and with the Craterhoof on the sidelines, I'll sleep like a baby at night. City of Fire is a really cool card. Tribute to the World Tree is also going in Tevis Jat and Rayhan, my Gruul +1/+1 counters deck. It replaces Nikara, Lair Scavenger. This deck is also replacing Wood Elves with Invasion of Zendikar. And Kami of Whispered Hopes is going in, replacing Karametra's Acolyte. Mana dorks aren't good, I wish they were, and I'll continue to cherish this kind of power creep. This deck is also getting Ancient Imperiosaur, a card I thought was absolutely insane when I first read it. You can get a 20/20 Trample, Ward 2 for 0 mana, but then I remembered it's 2023, and I thought of the Baldur's Gate Dragons. They're great, I love them, but how powerful are these cards really? Despite how the cards read, in a skilled play group, the play pattern is, you play these, they get removed. But that's what I want. I want to drop big threats that need to be answered. If I keep doing this and deploy correctly, people will run out of removal. But that's why cards like Old Gnawbone are a class ahead. You don't have to wait a turn. You play it, hit with the creatures you already have on board, make a ton of treasures, burst off in your second main. But those cards suck. They're too good. I think creatures needing to wait a turn to make such a big impact on the board is not only a good thing, it's kind of the point of creatures in Magic. With so many powerful creatures, the point of them is their ETB nowadays. You're basically turning creatures into sorceries. Instants and sorceries are the things that are supposed to make an immediate impact on the board, whereas a creature, you get lasting value, but it needs to stick around. So the Baldur's Gate Dragons and Ancient Imperiosaur aren't super powerful cards, but they're perfect ones. Just imagine if Dockside said, on your next upkeep, you get 1 billion treasures instead of now. Still a very powerful card, but not nearly as problematic from a design perspective. Anyway, the cut here for Ancient Imperiosaur is Necropolis Regent.
I'm done talking about green cards. Need a shower.
Brina the Demagogue is getting Surge of Salvation, a cool new card that's relatively straightforward. Getting the Axe is no mercy, a personal favorite, but with 16 spot removal and 7 board wipes in this deck, I think it was holding on to its deck spot on Love alone. Also getting cut is Baneslayer Angel. This deck is all about flyers with lifelink, and what an iconic card, but I think it's time I retired it. We're bringing in Drana and Limvala. I love a light stacks piece. I love playing other people's stuff. There's not much else to say other than this card is great. Staying in Orzhov, my Athreos with Loris as companion deck is getting a card. This is a strange deck. It's a dual commander deck tuned for 1-on-1. I think this Invasion of New Capenna is a great card. I'm sure many of you are like me, you always have an eye out for new removal options. And 2 mana Exile is great, provided you have the creatures to burn. This deck doesn't care about the backside at all, which I think shows how good this card is. This next deck getting the card does care about the backside. Fairy Madness, Alayla, Artful Provocateur. This backside is amazing if you care about it, but I'd say treat this as removal. Don't just fire off the front at something random so you can flip it and start pumping. Slowly pumping early game will get you killed. Hold it as removal and view the back as an awesome bonus. It's replacing collective effort in this deck. Also getting added, Invasion of Tolvada. I love this card. Judging first just what we get off the front side, 5 mana for Reanimate, a lot of people bemoaning the lack of efficiency here, and I'll admit I run a lot of Reanimate and Animate Dead, and it looks expensive next to those, but I love that it hits more card types. Against skilled opponents, I have no doubt that many of the best permanents I play will end up in the graveyard. The front side is great, and the back side is a souped up Bitter Blossom. I really think any deck could play this front side and it would be good for you in the mid to end game. But if you care about the back side, this card gets crazy. Bitter Blossom is amazing. This is amazing. You're amazing. You're doing a great job, except for Nadir Kraken. You're fired. You're getting cut. I'm sorry. It's just not me. It's you. Ivy Gleeful Spell Thief is getting Sword of Once and Future. I love Sword so much. I love Dimir so much. And this card is so disappointing. I think maybe with Surveil 3 or CMC 3 or less, it would have been such an exciting card. And this is just such a conservative design. But I am happy to find a home for it. Here I've got a cheap commander with evasion, because pro blue-black doesn't really help you get through. This deck also has 22 instants or sorceries with mana value 2 or less, which is so many, but it still only gives us a 38% chance to hit on the Surveil, so we'll rely on stuff we've already played, which is fine. But of our 22 possible hits, many are protection spells, there's some counters, stuff that won't really be useful even if we hit it. And many of our good hits are 1 CMC cards, so how much value are we really getting there? Not to mention that I only have 22 targets for this card because I cut 2 Aura spells for more cards that would just work with this sword. I'm adding bad cards to make other bad cards work. Something stinks. So the sword is a disappointment. But I love it. It's going in, and I like the feeling that I'm maybe one of the only people in the world with a commander deck where this sword kinda sorta works, and I'm obligated to run it under Section 2B of the Secret Commander Morality Code. The cut is Shielding Plaques, a card that is great in my deck as I mutate all my creatures on top of each other, hence supercharging my opponent's single target removal. This is a card I actually really need, but sacrificing what you actually really need for the greater good is what life's all about. That, and it's a water drinking contest. Miracle Lord of Bones is getting Invasion of Fiora, replaces Damnation. Invasion of Zendikar, replaces Wood Elves. And it's getting Thalia and the Gitrog monster. I love this card. It's ramp and card draw. I already said I love light stacks. I wish I could find more homes for it, but I really think the coming into play tap thing draws a lot of aggro. And you're only wanting to put this in decks that can embrace the flame. The cut here is Oracle of Moldiah. Marnius Calgar. These ads were fun because I had just built this deck and never played it, and then March of the Machines gets fully spoiled right before I buy my cards for Calgar, so I'm able to go through, add a bunch of the cool new stuff. I don't need to go over all the cuts because the deck was never played. But I had already spent a lot of time and effort on the 100 I picked, so the cuts were like pulling teeth, which is ultimately kind of a fun process, and I end up with the feeling like I have a super cool and optimized deck right out of the gate, or refined at least. It is ready to debut. I made a bunch of custom tokens, so it should really feel like you're getting attacked by a Space Marine army. I'm doing the same thing with this Sauron deck that I'm making, and I'll be selling on eBay. Hopefully that'll be up in a couple weeks. Here are the ads to Calgar. Schema Thief, Invasion of Tolvada, Invasion of New Phyrexia, Excise the Imperfect. This replaces Void Rend. Whoa. This card is so good, but is it better than Generous Gift? I really don't know. I like being able to hit a land with Generous Gift. I'd rather give them a 3/3 though, because that's a known asset. If I have to remove a 7 CMC commander or something, I could be dealing with a big beater at a time where I didn't want to. Which is why I feel comfortable including Excise the Imperfect in Calgar, because I know I'll have a lot of chump blocks for even the largest vanillas. There's also an upside of I could exile my own permanent to create a token and proc Calgar, a very niche situation for sure, but it could be useful. But back to where this card ranks against other spot removal, I really, really value the exile. I think this card is probably one of the best pieces of spot removal available, and I'm surprised I couldn't find a spot for it in more decks. but my removal packages are often catered to the theme, and I think this is a card you could just jam into any deck and be happy with it. Invasion of Segovia. Calgar is also getting this card. Standard players are finding out how cool this card is. The rare battle that you play for the backside. Giving non-creature spells Convoke is great when you have tokens. And in my Marnius Calgar deck, there are 42 non-creatures in the deck, so we'll have plenty of targets to ramp out. But the fact that it untaps creatures is just a bit ridiculous. The card would be super playable without that, and it's just a cool bonus. Chrome Host Siege Shark. This card will put in work here. As I mentioned, we have 42 non-creature spells in the deck, and I'll draw off these Incubate tokens. I know a lot of people are down on Incubate tokens, and I think it's true that the 2 mana you have to pay ends up adding up pretty quickly. But I do like the upside of keeping them unflipped, so part of your board is protected against creature-based board wipes. And you can flip them in instant speed to block. They're not strong, but they're useful. This card is going to work in the deck, but I will say it's in that 100th card slot of the next thing that comes in. This is probably the first thing that's going to get cut out of everything I have. So we'll see how it works out. The next card that we're getting in Calgar is Sea Double. Oh, I love this card. I look at it with a floor of 4 mana, copy any creature on the battlefield. Mid-end game, that mode will almost never be dead in your hand. Someone's going to play something nasty and useful. Then if you can copy a target spell, it can be one of your own or one of your opponent's. There's just so many amazing gotcha situations with this. If your opponent casts Decree of Pain, copy it, you'll resolve first, you'll draw the cards. This also works with Torment of Hailfire, Crackle with Power. There's also just copying big draw spells or a protection spell, a Teferi's Protection, Heroic Intervention. I could go on and on, but Sea Double is amazing. Ignore this if an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. You do not need to take that into consideration when looking at this card. You do not need both modes. Just the option of either is worth 4 mana, and both is amazing. Blue has so many clone and copy effects that not being able to copy it is a legitimate downside, but I still think this is one of your best clone option effects out of everything that's ever been printed. Calgar is also getting Elish Norn. Just Elish Norn. Yes. Weird and light stacks piece on the front, business in the back. These Incubate tokens will be separate triggers, giving us 5 draws with Calgar. You've got an Overrun. It's a nice card. Next deck, Xanathar Guild Kingpin. This is my favorite deck. Sea Double replaces the Immortal Sun, so you know it's good. Schema Thief is obviously going in. Replacing Planar Atlas and Invasion of Fiora is again pushing out my beloved Damnation. Okay, I saved the best for last. Phoenix, God of Deception. I've loved Mill ever since I was a little boy. Our epic childhood matchup was my brother's Sapperling Burst Pandemonium deck versus my traumatized Guilt Feeder deck. We played this matchup so many times. The Guilt Feeder deck was my darling oyster. This Phoenix deck is an ode to that deck. It's the second commander I ever built. In my opinion, Mill is super fun, and I also think it's underplayed in Commander and undersupported in Commander. This deck rarely gets new cards from a set. That's why I said I saved the best for last. Out of all of the cards printed in the last 2 years, only 7 cards have been added to this deck. So I am very pumped to add 7 new cards to this deck from a single set. Invasion of Fiora. Here I love that I can wipe all creatures. Phoenix will not die because he's indestructible, and I can swing in and flip it with him. Infernal Sovereign. Yes, please. Sea Double. You already know. Sheoldred. This card is playable in a lot of places, but its perfect home is here, where milling supercharges the concept. Breach the Multiverse.
Kind of cool. It's a Rise of the Dark Realms, alternative type card. Probably going to be infinitely cheaper than that. And I think it could be good. It's a 4-for-1, but it's probably a D+.
Yeah, I think this card is mostly bad. It's ridiculously cool. Ridiculously cool. Not very good. Yeah, D+ is a good grade for it.
My first thought, no, it's a bad Rise of the Dark Realms. My second thought, bad Rise of the Dark Realms is still good, and I get to have other people's stuff. What are you going to do after a board wipe? Replay your commander or have an instant board for 7 mana? 2 more cards for ads. Deluxe Dragster.
Unblockable, you say?
Okay. I'm going to start with this as a D-. It's bad. I don't want to talk about that. I don't care about this card. This card's bad.
No. You gotta see it from a mill player's perspective. Memory Lapse is awesome. Mid to late game, my opponent's graveyard turns into a full toolbox for me. This is repeatable. I'm playing this, and it'll be awesome, and I don't even really have reliable ways to crew this. Tapping creatures on my turn is really not how this deck works, but like I said, repeatable toolbox. And the last ad, Realm Breaker, the invasion tree.
This card is absurd, right? So what I see with this card is you got to get on the battlefield for 3 mana, but then every turn your mono blue deck or mono red deck or whatever essentially has a rampant growth. Like, odds are someone's going to have lands in their graveyard, fetch lands in their graveyard, plus you're milling. And when you consider that commander decks are 40 lands, that's a pretty high percentage that you're going to hit at least one land with the mill. So I see this as a repeatable rampant growth for non-green decks. For non-green decks, I don't know, is this a staple? Is this just like one of the best ramp spells if you don't have access to green?
If your opponent
I've been
plays
thinking
fetch
about
lands.
this card all week, actually. Like, seriously, I've been pondering this card ever since it was spoiled.
Are you up or down on it?
And I've come to the you've heard my initial take on this on the MTG Goldfish podcast, but my conclusion is this card sucks.
Oh no!
Here's where.
Damn, I wish this card would be a non-green ramp staple. It's almost good enough. I'd put it in so many decks, but it's not. However, in a mill deck, it's the perfect home, and that's actually better than being a staple. Here's just a pile of random extra stuff I have from this set. This isn't a spec on Schema Thief, just a love affair. Which brings me to my last section, cards I wanted to mention. Phyrexian Censor. Don't just view this as a piece for Phyrexian Tribal. This is good in a lot of decks. Sunfall. This card is great, but I just generally run a lot of recursion. I don't run this. But maybe that's why you should run this. Me and a lot of other people play recursion. Jin Cataxius. Ah, yes, I wanted to talk about this. I am a card draw connoisseur. And when I saw this card, I was pumped. A new blue card draw powerhouse. It's going to go in so many of my decks. But the more I thought about it, the less I liked it, and it didn't end up going in anything. It's a card with homes for sure. And I could talk about this card for a long time because there's so much going on, but I'll try brevity for once. Here's my 2 main issues with this card. I have to have 7 cards in my hand. Those of you who know me know I run an absolutely absurd amount of card draw in my decks. I'm as likely to have 7 cards in my hand as anyone, and I value burst card draw above all, which is what this is. But if I have 7 cards in my hand already, I'm good. This card only burst draws you if you don't need the burst draw. Then you get an Omniscience. Okay, here's a weird question. Omniscience is powerful, but is it even good? There's a reason it's only in 3% of decks. I used to run it in my Kenrith Group Hug deck, a deck that can draw an absolutely absurd amount of cards and ramp so hard I can easily get to the 10 mana. But a few times I found myself with 30, 40, even 70 plus mana available for a turn 1 game and not needing this at all. In general, if you think you can reliably ramp to 10, you can reliably ramp far beyond 10. Even in the Christmas Land scenario, where you have 46 cards in your hand and you drop an Omniscience, which happened to me on my channel, opponent then board wiped and won. In most cases, you need an additional card, a haste enabler. Omniscience is amazing when people cheat it into play like absolute savages. It's a cool card with homes, but I cut it from Kenrith and I haven't found a spot just where I think it's good enough or needed enough yet. So Jin being able to Omniscience 2 full turns after you flip it, I don't know, I'm just unimpressed with this card. I know I'm biased, it's a good card, it's just not a good fit in any of my decks, and I'm a blue card draw fiend, so I'm disappointed. Stasis Field. Budget blue, I'm telling you, this is where it's at. Horsemanship is back. After being at a 9 on the Storm scale, it's back almost exactly 24 years from the time it was last printed on a new Magic card. I love this mechanic. I even have a Horsemanship commander. If you even noticed. You never listen. I never said it actually. I showed it, and that's way more powerful. What an amazing tutor, Hoarding Broodlord. Now I'm going to go eat sushi at the Cincinnati airport. Atali, Primal Conqueror. I know I was just bemoaning over power creep turning creatures into sorceries, but Atali is beloved, and I will make an exception and not hate this card. I'll love this card. I love this card. Feels good. Urabrask. I don't do spell slingery stuff, and if you do, we're kind of mortal enemies, and I'm not happy about this card. Invasion of Chandelar. So good. Like, I was saying, your graveyard is going to be full of your best stuff that your opponent's ever moved. I love this card, and the backside would be so good for my Kodama. So why add, Ace? Good question. The front side wants to be played late, but the backside wants to be played early. Putting a permanent down per turn for free is great, but it's kind of a slow effect. It feels weird to say, but it's 2023. That's where we're at. It would be great if I could get it out early, but the front side is wanting to be played late. I wish this card was the other way around. Drawing 3 cards out of your graveyard is just so good for 5 mana. It's 1,000 times better than a Harmonize. I think this is worth a play for the front side alone. I just couldn't find a cut to get it in. Kogla and Yodaro. Flexible removal attached to a body. This card is great and will probably get underplayed. This last category is strange. Commanders from the set that I loved and wanted to build, but I have too many decks. Inga and Essica. Mana dorks are bad, and this makes them good. So good. I love it. I hate Simic, but they just keep printing so many cool commanders. Slimefoot and Squee. Such a cool card design. Repeatable recur. There's a lot of fun things I put into this build. Shout out to Austin, who already bought the first version of this deck. He's a new sub, and he said it's a blast to play, and I'll be putting up another version soon with some slight tweaks. Rashmi and Ragavan. Okay, this is my favorite commander from the set. Maybe my favorite commander of all time. I've already said my Xanathar deck is my personal favorite, and I love playing other people's stuff. Commander with 100 cards, I never tutor. It's all about RNG, and there's nothing more RNG than having no idea how you will win because you're relying on your opponent's stuff. Spreading out who you steal from in case people are eliminated and beating them with their own cards. This is like a version of Xanathar that's good. Xanathar is just not good. He costs 6 mana, and then you have to pay the full cost for their spells. You're not generating value. Here you are. And there's a lot of cool stuff that goes in this deck, including the perfect home for the new Atali. And I'll probably build this deck in paper, but I have 22 decks. So what I'm going to do is wait till the end of 2023 and see if anything is printed that makes me want to build it more than this. But I doubt it will, but we'll see. March of the Machine Aftermath was also spoiled in the amount of time I was working on this video, so I wanted to talk about that. I don't have too much to say. It was a small set. I'm not getting many ads. But there is a huge card in my opinion. This opened the way. To me, this is the best ramp card that's ever been printed. I'm adding it to all 11 of my decks that contain green. Some cards get you basics, some get you forest. What's better? I don't want forest. Those aren't my good lands. I want my Yavimaya Haloa, my Nykthos Shrine of Nyx, and my Volrash Stronghold, and Maze of Ith, and Glacial Chasm. This card is for me. So it's going in 11 decks. Here's the cuts. Invasion of Zendikar for Miracle. Wow, life moves fast. 2 Soul Rings are getting cut, 3 Visits, a Planar Atlas, a Sculpting Steel, Jiraga Tree Speaker, Steve, Chromatic Lantern, Faeburrow Elder, which is getting cut from 2 decks, Ramos and Tiamat. And Tiamat is the only other deck getting a card from the set other than Open the Way. It's getting Sarkhan, Soul of Flame. This will be great because dragons usually need to wait a turn to hit. Love this. Deification is a cool card. It's going in my Nahiri Oathbreaker deck. And there was some other cool stuff, but nothing else added. Tazri is an awesome commander. I built the deck to sell, and it was a very fun and cool build. The new Ob Nix will be insane in my brother's Rakdos Lord of Riots deck. This Leyline Immersion I strongly considered for Ramos, but it's like a worse Timeless Lotus. You need a creature out, and I think it'll get removed. The Ward 2's not enough. Timeless Lotus gets removed, and here they'll be 2 for 1ing you. Cool and playable card. I just have no homes for it. If you're still watching, thank you so much for letting me ramble on. I hope I have provided some value. This is a different type of video than what I usually do, but card evaluation is really what I'm most interested in, so maybe more of this stuff in the future, we'll see.
Ace's Tavern.